Probably at the Empire Talk.
Yeah. We're just going to go.
Are y'all ready? Yeah. All right, cool. We'll start. It's so loud. We'll start. Thanks for coming to this talk instead of the Empire Talk. I'm Chris. This is Ken, not Kevin Johnson.
Not Kevin. I am not Kevin Johnson, for those of you that are disappointed and would like a moment to leave.
He's next door.
We might be a little tipsy, so that should be interesting. I am former Navy. If you know me at all, it's because of Rails Goat. I've done a talk with Chris before on DevOps, an offensive talk. This is a defensive talk. And then exploitation of web applications. I run engineering.
Awesome.
Told you we've been drinking. I run engineering for a security company, so you can imagine I've got some concerns, and we're going to talk through those concerns and the defensive measures through this talk.
All right, so it's me. I'm currently over at Uber doing blue team stuff, so I put away my red hat for a bit, and now I'm doing blue team. I've talked about all kinds of red teaming stuff to include DevOps stuff. Now we're going to do blue, because I've been living blue for the last 2 years. So I'm actually starting to like Python and REST APIs, because, I didn't think so either. And then I'm really astonished at the number of people that can't internet. I really didn't think it was that large a number, but it's pretty big.
So like I said, our original talk was about breaking things. This is a defensive talk. One quick story I would like to share with you is that some of the things that go along with this talk was a real experience for me. Basically, we're a security company. We do these security things that you would expect, right? But we did have what we thought might have been an attack, and it turned out to be nothing. But I was driving through West Virginia, in the hills of West Virginia, going about 25 miles an hour through windy curves, and also trying to play incident response. Turned out it wasn't even really an incident, but a lot of what came out of that spurred, how do we truly know when things are happening? And if you deal with AWS, if you deal with some of the practices that DevOps shops have, which is allowing engineers to push code and infrastructure, this might help you. So,
yeah, I've been doing this the last 2 years, and I've worked in basically the last 2 jobs, fairly loose egress standards, so we've had to push detection and response down to the host, which is an interesting problem. So everywhere else I've worked, you've had massive proxies and firewalls and VPNs and made it really difficult to get out. And the last 2 places, they're very free and let the developers do what they want. So you need to actually catch the developer as they're doing something bad or right after they did it before a bad guy does. So it just really changes the paradigm of what you need to do and try to catch and when you try to catch it. I'll do this one. So there's a whole bunch of info. Here we go. We'll do Q&A after, unless we start talking even faster than we already are. And we're going to talk about human, host, and infrastructure topics, and that's how we're going to break the talk up. So human is, we want to make it difficult for our employees to allow attackers to walk into our environment. So ways that employees can do that, dump interesting things from the company on Pasteman. Has anybody seen that happen at their org? So yeah. Same thing for GitHub. Who's had someone check in an access key? Tons of people, right? So you get into the thing is the more and more we use these cloud-based things, you've got to figure out how to alert to that, because sometimes if you're not using proper roles or you're not expiring keys, one access key on GitHub gets your whole place owned, right? So below there are some examples of things that Ken and I have seen. So Slack tokens in GitHub, tons and tons and tons of AWS keys, and then all kinds of MySQL tokens and passwords and everything else. So hopefully you all agree that this is a problem that we need to find a way to monitor and address. So ways you could tackle is stand up these GitHub type resources internally. So GitLab, GitAlike, GitHub Enterprise, and Fabricator are ways you could do that from an internal perspective. But if you're already using GitHub for your organization, it's going to be super difficult. What you're probably going to do is just set up a private GitHub and then enroll people into your organization as they come on board. This allows them to have access to all the projects. They're not public, but then you have to worry when someone accidentally takes a private internal repo and posts it on their personal stuff. Does anybody have that happen? One. So two. I've seen it happen a lot at the last two jobs. So it does happen quite a bit for anybody that's using that. So how you can tackle that if you got some people that can write code. As people join your organization, you crawl that list daily, hourly, however you want to do it. You check out your repo and also their repos, and then you regex and look for known badness. So if you've got internal code and it's got headers or AWSTs, or you can basically regex whatever you want to find known badness. Most people can't do that because they don't have time to build that. If someone did that for you, it's called GitRob. Has anybody heard of it? Cool. It's awesome. So what it does is you give it an organization, and it does exactly what I said. It will say, okay, here's, I forget who this is, but it does that organizations. It takes all the members of that organization and it starts crawling their repos as well, looking for things. And then it spits out a page of findings. So that's like an example of one of the pages of when I ran it against somebody. It was Magneto because they were doing bug bounty, so that was in scope. And then so I found this guy that had a git config. That's interesting. And so inside of that git config was the guy's GitHub token. So that's not good, right? No, that's not good. Okay, cool. All right, stay with me. So what someone that's like a jerk could do, like myself, is you could take an afternoon and investigate the Python Boto library that interacts with AWS. And so when you find an AWS key, you could probably say, cool, I want to go ahead and check every AWS service if this key works for it. So at the top is saying, like, that's an invalid key. The one at the bottom says, that's a root account. So everybody know what the root account for AWS does? Everything. So in that case, someone had checked that into GitHub. And then, so when you don't have immediate root, you want to keep going. So this other example shows down there at the bottom in the red is there were a few functions that were allowed. So you can now pivot off of those and start to see what you can do. And then like the same thing for S3 buckets. With that key, you can say, can I LS buckets? What's in these buckets? And do other things. Basically pivot from there and go deeper. So wrapping that up, I want to be able to find out when employees make that as quickly as possible. You want to talk about this or?
Nah.
Okay. Pastebin, same problem with Pastebin. I'm going to roll through these. So anybody seen Dumpmon or the Twitter account for this? With Dumpmon, you can basically say, I want to look for hashes, emails, or whatever for my company. And so you can run this for your own company and then not post them on Twitter, but post them internally. So, hi. So you can do stuff with it. Oh, thanks, man. I've been waiting all day for this. You're not here, so I can. Yeah, okay.
Warm Smirnoff. Thank you, Derbycon.
Anyway, so if you got cache and you don't want to actually roll your own code, there's 4-pay services like Recorded Future. Anybody heard of them? No? All right. Well, they owe me. Oh, a couple. So you can basically do the same thing we were talking about. It will monitor Pastebin. It will monitor Twitter. It will monitor all these things for you, for your VIPs, for all the other things in your organization if you don't want to do it yourself. So if you got the cache, you can do something like that. If you're worried about credentials getting dumped, Hold Security is a company that will like troll all the black market forums. And then if it finds credentials for your company, if you're paying them, we'll let you know about it. So that's good to know. One for you finally.
Yay! So this is Git Monitor. It's a tool that allows you to basically keep track, of things. For instance, if somebody pushes directly to master without going through the peer review process, I don't know how many of you deal with application security, but if you've got to make sure that people go through a peer review process of their code before merging into what goes into production, this is a nice little way to alert. And then in terms of there's a lot of things that Git Monitor essentially gives you. So it's a nice little service. Try it out. It's free, actually, if you want to try it out. And I have no affiliation. It's locked, by the way. I don't know why.
Fix it.
There you go.
Yep. So host-based stuff. Anybody heard of OS Query? Cool, couple. So we're going to talk about all these. The idea is we're pushing the detection down to the host, and these are some tools that would facilitate you doing that in your organization. So OS Query, it's basically a rootkit for these various things. It allows you to hook all the different functions on the operating system and then use a SQL-like language to query all that information. Super awesome. Right now it's just for Mac, Linux, and BSD, but the guy that wrote it at Facebook quit Facebook and now has his own company, and they'll have a Windows one soon. So it's worth checking out once they release that. So these are kind of the queries you can do. You can run like ad hoc, like I want to know on any given day, who has full disk encryption enabled. You can schedule things. You can do file integrity monitoring, like tripwire type stuff, and do what most people will probably be interested in is the query packs for these. Probably can't see that. I can kind of see it. So Facebook publishes a ton of query packs for these, and they go from, hey, is disk encryption enabled, to, are you running this malware variant, right? So you can push these configs out to your fleet. It will run, and then you basically need a way to have that data check back in somewhere, and all that is built into OS Query, the ability to forward those logs out somewhere. Most people use Splunk to get that done. So here's an example for checking in Splunk. So for the OS X attacks Ganeo malware, you can say, okay, this is the query, and then if there was anybody in your fleet that had that on there, it would pop up there. Super useful. We going okay? All right. So Doorman. Doorman allows you to actually interact with those OS Query configs in a more timely manner. Normally, if you wanted to change the config, however you're managing your OS Query config, and most people will use like Chef or Puppet to do that, you would have to push that change out, wait for the Chef job to run, however often that runs, and then let it run, and then wait for your data to come back. Doorman is like another agent that would run on that would allow you to do that in a bit more interactive way. So it kind of looks like that. It will show you your active nodes, and then you can say, hey, I want to run this particular query because I'm looking for this MD5 across my fleet. Then you can use a tool like Doorman to facilitate doing that faster than like your Chef turnaround. Does that make sense? Cool. A couple people are with me. Anybody heard of Block? Just Rob. And you're cheating because you've seen the deck already. So basically it's a kernel hook, and it wants to alert you when anytime software wants to persist. So it kind of looks like that. It's like, hey, I did something. Your developer is installing a bunch of stuff because they always install the weirdest stuff to do whatever. And then this would pop up in their face and say, hey, this tool wants to go ahead and be persistent and launch every time you start up. Do you want to allow this or not? So pushing responsibility and alerting and some other things down to the developer level or the host level. How about Little Snitch? All right, cool. Host-based firewall, should probably use it. It does have is it ODay still? There's an ODay in it, apparently. Talk to Rob. I think it's in immunities stuff. So same thing, it just alerts you and allows you to manage connections. So if something shady is going on, it should allow you on the host to get alerted that something weird's going on. How about Carbon Black? Anybody use Carbon Black? All right, cool. Yay. I love Carbon Black. It basically allows you to monitor net connections, file writes, registry queries, basically everything that happens on a host. Does support Windows, supports Mac, supports some flavors of Linux, but not Ubuntu. And so what's there below is like some queries you could run. So like if you wanted to find any executable on the system that was co-signed with the code of GentleWiki, so you're looking for Mimikatz, Carbon Black could be on your fleet. You could have that as a watch list or however you choose to do that, and it would alert you when Mimikatz was on someone's box. Same thing for someone turning off file encryption, unsigned jars doing weird stuff, or like someone's trying to dump OS X access. So it kind of looks like that. So this is an example of somebody kicking off command.exe that kicks off PowerShell, who then starts doing who am I and task list. So basically common post-exploitation stuff. So you can visually see what's going on there. What's highlighted is like we're triggering on the dash encoded command. So you can trigger on command line arguments. You can command on alert on net connections outbound, or just anything you want. It's a pretty powerful tool. Same thing, it does similar things for Mac. And so Sysmon is like the poor man's version of that. A couple of really smart, like Carlos Perez has done blog posts on it. Jason Craig has done some blog posts on it. You can use Sysmon as a Carbon Black replacement. So if you can't afford the outrageous fees they charge for that, you can look at that as an option. And then OS Query for Windows will come out in the next couple months. Would be another thing to investigate if you've got to monitor Windows stuff. And so all the so many slides. All that data has to go somewhere, right? So who relies on like their end user to like let them know when something bad's going on? Nobody. Awesome. Good. Yeah, that was the right answer. So you want all that OS query data, that carbon black data, all that other data to go somewhere so you can now run queries against it or do other instrumentation, right? So Splunk is a way to do that. This is the Enterprise app, which is an add-on that just shows you really neat things about your fleet. Same thing if you want to do Elk, you can do an Elk stack, so Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Same thing, all those logs forward into an Elasticsearch database, and then you can now run queries against those to look for indicators of compromise, who's running what versions of software, or whatever it is that you're logging. So the idea is I need to get all that data from that laptop to somewhere where someone that cares about it is actually doing queries, or is at least that tool is creating email alerts for someone to take some action later. Really depends on the size of your shop and how many people you're trying to protect.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So, awesome. You're very courteous. In terms of Simian, so Chris has just talked about some low-cost options. This is an alternative for shops that really can't afford. They have OS X and they're developing code, but they can't necessarily afford a patch management tool. So Simian's free. It's built by Google. Runs on Google Cloud. Here is the information I think is most important. It is, besides the fact that it's free and it runs at an enterprise level, and we all know patch management is 101, there is a repo out there on GitHub that you can download this from, and there are two pieces to it. There's the web application that runs on Google Cloud, and basically the client portion of that feeds, you create clients for each individual laptop, and that client feeds into the server hosted on Google Cloud, and you can push patches from that server. The patches are themselves Monkey, and it's essentially XML, and you can keep developer laptops up to date. And I'd say it's moderately difficult to get up to speed, but once you understand it, it's really nice. And another thing is you can actually, when you provide the client to folks, you can put all of the things that they need, like their own personal key, set of keys, and their configuration inside of the DMG, and then GPG encrypted or whatever the case is, provide it to them. And once they run the DMG, they're good to go. They're hooked in. You push patches. It's very simple and it's free. I think the only, and this is a screenshot of what it looks like, I think the only thing that is sort of pertinent to mention in terms of cost is that while it's free, storage can cost, say you're a 20, 10, 30 person organization, you might have to spend $20 or $30 a month just on storage, but it's really a low cost option. So just something for those folks that can't afford the big stuff. Okay, so now we're going to talk a lot about AWS. Got time.
Doing good on time.
Cool. Yeah, we had like 100. Never mind. We had a lot of slides. So with AWS, our goal was to harden, because actually, before I start, who's using AWS? All right, so almost everybody's using AWS. So what we wanted to do was, and this kind of ties back to that story I was telling you, my big concern was, yes, I can go in after the fact, yes, I can harden, but I really don't know what's happening, when things are changing, if people are doing malicious things. So that is what we're going to cover during the monitoring section. But our goal is to harden, monitor, and then be able to recover if the worst case happens. So I took the AWS Security Fundamentals course and working through certification alongside some people I'm working with, and what I realized is their recommendations actually follow very closely along with the real world sort of prioritization and controls that I wanted to enact, and Chris as well inside of AWS.
We use a lot of AWS.
Yep. So we want to make it difficult, obviously, for attackers to reach us. There's a few basic things that you need to know. These 5 things should absolutely be on your checklist. And I'm going to talk about things we're not talking about in this discussion, but don't use the root account for everyday operational operational stuff, we'll say. In terms of the access keys, you don't need them for the root account because it's not doing operational things. It shouldn't be interacting with the API. Multi-factor authentication, enabling multi-factor authentication for the API, and then, of course, strong password policy. So every AWS account has has a root. Every AWS environment has a root account. That root account is God, essentially, of that environment. And what we're going to talk about when we talk about alerting and when we talk about why not to use this account will all tie in when we talk about CloudWatch, a service offered by AWS. So let's start with the access keys. Okay, obviously don't use the root account for operational purposes. Delete the access keys. Make sure that you have a both written and verbal policy that states you won't use this for everyday things. If credentials, so with multi-factor authentication, if your credentials are guessed or stolen, this will help you. There are a couple ways you can do it. You can enable MFA for every user using virtual devices or hardware devices. That I know of, there's only Gemalto for AWS hardware. It's really easy to do, and because of that, and because we had so many slides, it'll be in the published deck of how to enable this, but it's really not that complicated, so we're skipping it for brevity. However, there's some things we don't want to skip about it. When you enable MFA, it's worth noting that well, first of all, that people without IAM privileges don't have the ability to enable that on their own account by default. Obviously that's an issue. We don't want administrators like doing a screen share or something like that and passing around QR codes, and the whole thing can be messy. So
just email it out.
So this is the policy. Probably didn't get that. Here's a link that will be in the published docs that give you a link to a policy that you can attach to people's accounts that will allow them to have very restricted set of permissions, and that'll be to manage their own multi-factor authentication device or two-factor authentication. So if you need MFA, and you absolutely should need MFA for a shared root account, so assuming more than one person needs access to that root account, pretty good assumption, you can use a password storage service, because what AWS does is they use TOTP for the multi-factor authentication code, and so like 1Password and I believe LastPass and whatever else services, they should use it. So this is the interesting part, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later when we go into a specific QORA thread, but one thing that it's sort of a reoccurring theme, and I know Chris kind of touched on it, is that when people get exploited, it's typically through the API, it's typically through leaked AWS access key ID and secret. So what we're going to talk about will help prevent the stolen credentials from actually becoming a real huge problem for you. So in order to require multi-factor authentication, not just for the web console, but for the API, this is all you have to do on your policy. You just add this one line, it's a conditional, and this for both web and API will require multi-factor authentication. At first it's painful. I can tell you from experience, it's really painful because then things don't work. And when you're doing this, going back a slide, it should be for admin and power users, so the people that need to do a lot of things are now like kind of not super happy with you. There is a solution though, and that is STS, the Security Token Service, and that's essentially, I don't know if you want to chime in there on how you've seen that done.
Okay, yeah, I can. I've seen that done in a way that you can run a client, create a client locally that will request a temporary token for you. So, like I say, you want to do a 24-hour token, you can. Takes a bit of slicing and dicing and some code writing, but you could say, hey, I want to go ahead and tie in my two-fact solution. The two-fact will generate me a 24-hour use AWS access key and secret key, and then allow someone to do their work for the day, and they're just going to have to do that every day. So in the event they do publish that key, now the clock is ticking on how useful that is.
Yeah, and actually, so this is I've got a link in here, and again, it's in the published slides. It's some code I wrote that does this exactly what Chris is talking about. For a day, it might be 8 hours, whatever. For whatever amount of time period you want to specify, and you can change that in the script, you will have access to the API using some temporary credentials, and they expire after that duration, which is really awesome. This is an example of running that script. What you get back, so what you put in is your access key, ID, and your access secret. It sends those credentials to me. I log into your AWS environment. Everybody's kind of just, I think, asleep a little bit. Nothing. Maybe it wasn't funny. So anyways, so your access key ID.
Like, oh, wait, to you.
Wait a second. Yeah.
Send it to me. I'll help you. I'll send you access keys all day long. This is true.
That is true. So for access key, so you provide your access key ID in secret, and then it hits the API, and you get back a new ID, a new secret, and nobody, and a temporary token. So you get 3 sets of new credentials back, and again, they expire after a period of time. Why this is important is obviously there are tools, so there's people that need to push code, they need to push infrastructure, they need to do, this is just an example of using one of AWS's tools, their CLI tools. And so, this is kind of an idea that it does work. You pass in the new credentials, and you can still use the API. You just now have this second form of authentication that's required. It's really, really helpful and would have frustrated an attacker, right? So for those that don't like Ruby, Python is available at this link. So you got a Python set of code. So Elastic Beanstalk by default does not support STS. That's the one area that I found that you run into trouble with. So what you do is you actually hook Code Pipeline, another AWS service, into GitHub, into S3, or into their, Code Commit. So it's like their AWS's GitHub, and then you're good. So I'm not going to cover this too in depth, but obviously you should have a password policy because, it's been found that you can bypass AWS's security controls to brute force passwords. So you should have a policy enabled. And again, you can read all this later in the published slides, just an example policy. So to recap, make it hard to get to, make people jump through hoops, and figure out how STS works, because once you figure that out, you're gonna be able to harden things without hurting people. So this is the things we won't talk about, right? These are the things that everybody else talks about, which are like S3 bucket policies, security groups, things like that, right? And that's important, and you should definitely read up on that, and that's part of your, there's a couple checklists that AWS provides, their operational checklists and auditing checklists, and in those cases, yeah, you absolutely should go through these things and read up on it, but it's what everybody talks about. I wanted to provide, and I think we wanted to provide something that's a little bit more practical, and then also use Trusted Advisor, which is, again...
I was going to say, who's heard of that? Oh, awesome.
Okay, cool. That catches these things. So, low-hanging fruit kind of stuff, this will catch it. So, going back to it again, like you Google, AWS security, and these are the first few links that pop up, and they're pretty good. So there's a lot of those checklists out there. So this is, I think, where I found this to be a little bit more interesting. This is more about monitoring and detection in real time. So, assuming your hardening and prevention has failed, we will discuss some examples of some putting in some alerts that will allow you to detect that something's going on. And what I will say about this, and especially when you talk about config, is that there's a ton of noise that comes out of these tools. So it's going to take you some time to kind of pare down into what's important. But I guess I'd rather have the fire hose than limited or no information. So there's 4 services. There's CloudTrail, there's SNS, CloudWatch, and config. These 4 services combined can provide you a ton of real-time monitoring and detection. What I'll say is that SNS is used for notifications. CloudTrail is simply a log. It's a set of logs on everything that goes on in your AWS environment. And Chris will talk a little about config. Config is essentially, what I'll say about config is sort of like a blunt force tool, and or blunt object is what I meant. Mm-hmm. And then CloudWatch is more of a like fine-tune. These are the specific things that I'm looking for. Here's a good example of some of the. You can see there's a lot of services here, and it may be hard to see, but they all feed into CloudTrail, the logging service, right? And at that point, and it gets stored to an S3 bucket. And at that point, what you have the option of doing is analyzing and pooling and doing whatever you want with that data. And so we're going to talk about some of that. This is our basic setup for the talk. You've got CloudTrail keeping logs, CloudWatch config pulling from those logs, and then whatever they analyze and find to be something they should tell you about, they push to SNS, and SNS hits you up. So I'm going to go into CloudTrail real quick. CloudTrail is, like I said, it's where you store once you turn it on, everything gets logged, and it's really easy to turn it on. Because once you start turning it on like you do here, you just give it some information like the S3 bucket name that you want to you have to approve it to have, an IAM role so that it can do what it needs to do. And then it's enabled. Like, it's really super simple to do. And you'd be surprised how many AWS environments I've seen that don't even have CloudTrail on, let alone some of the other things we're going to talk about. Or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. So, SNS, again, this is a notification service. So it offers a few things that I really like. For some of these things that we're going to talk about, I want immediate notifications. So you can get an SMS, and you can get it sent to your, whoever. In this case, me and a couple other folks. Email, and then also if you've got an app, and this is really nice, is that it'll send a JSON request off to an app, and you'll be able to store whatever data that it sent, right? So if you're trying to build your own thing and filter out the data, this is a good way to do it. So you can also get this hooked into Slack. I didn't mention that, or whatever you're using, Campfire, or whatever the case may be. But the basic gist is you can get immediate notifications. This is an example. You go into SNS, you create a topic. This one's called root account usage, and there's a reason for that, and I am going to discuss it. And then you create subscribers. This one's like an SMS. This is all point and click. It's very easy. Create SMS. I think this one's email, and essentially you can have multiple subscriptions that fall under a topic. So if something gets triggered, whatever ways you've set up and whoever you've told that this needs to go to, it'll be in there. This is all you.
Yay. I'm excited. Config, so like Ken was saying, it's the blunt force tool?
Blunt force.
It's basically all the logging, right? So allows you to say you can use config for doing discovery of your assets, compliance type things, tracking your change management, or using that for incident response. So like, hey, we had an incident, let's go through and see what changed with that incident, or because of that incident, or what was before and what is the after state. So it comes with a whole bunch of like pre-packaged rules you can use, and you can certainly start rolling your own. But things like, hey, is CloudTrail enabled? Like, I want to know that because I need that for all the other things. Did you encrypt volumes on your EC2 instances and things like that? Anything to add to that, or is that good?
No, that's
yeah. I mean, incoming SSH disabled. Those things that you want to be alerted to. So examples of things that you can set up alerts for, like changing the firewall, so someone has compromised your stuff, and now they're going to go ahead and open and allow another port in for you.
Or they're just doing that because that's what people do.
Yeah. There's do you remember the guy's name, Rob, that did all the AWS exploitation or post-exploitation stuff? I can't think of the blog. We'll talk about it. But there's a guy that gave a whole bunch of like post-exploitation things you want to change in the various AWS services once you have access. So this would allow you to actually backtrack and go through. Yeah, it's really sneaky stuff too. So, ideally you would like look at his blog and then go through and make these config changes or these config additions so you could actually alert on that stuff. Up to like any change at all. So you can alert on all changes if you're feeling sadomasochistic.
Yes,
so to get it going, like here's some examples of some of the things so like at a minimum you want to do like alerting on the security groups, network ACLs, and the VPCs. So choose what resources you want to track, or you can choose everything, which is a ton of stuff. Again, create your bucket, create the SNS topic that will send the alerts out, and create the role, and then you're all ready to go.
All right. So we talked about, I'm just going to say blunt force tool.
Blunt force tool?
Yeah. So now this is CloudWatch. It's refined, and there's going to be 4 alerts specifically that we're going to talk about. So we can be very, as I said, particular. The 4 that we're going to talk about are, one's not on there, but billing alerts, tracking root account usage, failed logins, and then unauthorized IAM activity, which goes back to, and we'll talk about it, sort of what Chris was talking about, this AWS Interrogate tool. So with the billing alarm, this is a very simple one. Essentially, if you start spending a lot more money than you normally spend, you want to be alerted to it, right? That seems to be the theme, is when people steal access keys, they start spinning up a lot of things.
Have people seen that? Like, lost an access key, and then all of a sudden they got a $100,000 AWS bill because people are making Bitcoins and doing other things?
And I will talk about a little bit about, whose responsibility that ends up being. If you think AWS is going to take care of you on that, you might not be right. So in terms of getting that set up, you first have to go in and allow your account to receive billing alerts. Then you have to go in, create a topic on SNS, create some subscribers. Sorry.
I don't even use AWS. I'm out of here, man. Where's the Metasploit show?
Yeah. Where is it? Anyway, so for CloudWatch, you go into the metrics portion of CloudWatch. We're going to talk about metrics and logs. So metrics on the left-hand side, you go in and you just choose billing metrics, and you know, for us, US dollars, choose your currency, set up a billing spend point. This shows $1,600. So if you go over that $1,600 within your allotted time frame, you get an alert. And the exact steps are found here. This one's a little bit different. This is the root account login. So this is sort of, I like this part, talking about this part, because I have a real experience about this, and the team can attest to it. Essentially, what happens is, so I said don't use the root account operationally. For us, if the root account gets used, there are times when you have to use it. When it gets used, if somebody at this point doesn't tell us ahead of time that they're going to use the root account, everybody flips out. Everybody freaks out, right? You know, even if it's always mundane stuff, we always flip out. And the reason is, anytime somebody logs into those root credentials, everybody gets alerted on it. And we all know, and we're on it in like a minute. So it's kind of, and that wasn't something we didn't put a policy out. We weren't like, oh, this is how this is going to work. It's just we set up the alert, and then it just sort of worked. Like, everybody kind of just jumps on things when they see these notifications. So for your organization, that may work. I don't know. For ours, it did. So again, you have to go into CloudWatch. Instead of metrics, you choose logs. So logs on the left-hand side. You're going to choose the trail that you want to pull from CloudTrail, whatever log stream you've got. Then you want to use this regex, which may or may not be visible. Don't worry, again, we've got links to everything, and we'll publish these slides. You set up the regex, put in some information like namespace, kind of just some naming conventions around it, and that regex essentially pilfers the CloudTrail data like you would with Splunk or some other monitoring tool, and alerts you. Right now, we want to create an alarm at this point. We've already got this metric, or this sort of filtering that we're doing, but we don't have an alarm for it. So we want to create an alarm. We want to go in and say, hey, look, if within a 5-minute period the root account's logged in more than once, or logged in at least once or more, alert us. And we have like a nice little SNS topic that it goes to, and then all the subscribers to that topic get hit up. Again, exact steps with the link are here. So failed login attempts. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Essentially, this just is, hey, somebody's trying to break in and guess the credentials. Again, so yeah, in the interest of time, I don't really want to discuss, because like most of the steps are the same as the last one. The only step that's different is that the regex is a little bit different. And you get that regex from this link. So, but you should have at least those three by this point: root account, billing, and failed logins. This other one kind of ties back into AWS Interrogate. So this is the antidote to that. So if somebody is trying to see what they can do, or if you have malicious internal actors that are trying to access AWS services they really shouldn't be authorized for, this will actually help you detect that. So steps are the same as the other two. You go into logs and you set up these regex, and here's the regex for it. But again, you probably can't see it, and you get the links later. But this is us running AWS Interrogate. Not much, just telling us, hey, we either have access or don't. And then when it did that, an email gets sent to, or however you've set it up in SNS. In this case, an email got sent out to our team, right? That somebody is trying to access something they're not supposed to. So it's real time. I think it takes maybe like a few minutes to catch up, but it's pretty good.
So is that useful?
Yeah, I'm curious.
All right, cool.
Okay.
I know it's a lot of stuff. Hey, thanks. I'll actually drop some code that does some bad shit, and then you can actually alert on it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, sell them the problem and the solution. There you go. So these are the custom filters. The link with basically, if you want to create your own regex for whatever use case you can think of, there is a link you can go to that provides you with that information. And I'll bow out.
So, like we mentioned before, we're doing great on time. You want to do something with all that data, right? So, if you choose to use Splunk, there's a ton of AWS plugins that come with that. That's probably the two that you definitely want to use. That you can plug in all of your AWS billing activity and other logs and everything else that can come into that and allow you to do alerts. So examples of things you can do: billing, usage, someone adding keys, network ACLs, someone changing the settings on the VPCs. All interesting things that you want to know about. Perhaps you didn't get around to setting up all the alerts to send you an email, but now you can use Splunk to do some of that as well if you choose to do that. Splunk will also do plenty of alerting and watch lists and send you emails when things happen as well. So this is another way you could do that. So here. Yeah. Yeah, I think we talk about it. You have to basically give it permission for Splunk to get all that data into it.
Oh, and you need to be using Splunk Enterprise.
And be using Splunk Enterprise. All right, so this is like showing geographically some information about your AWS infrastructure. If you're using this, it will auto-generate a topology node for you based on what's the different services that are coming in. Billing alerts, so everyone cares about that one. No one wants to get that $100,000 AWS bill when you expected the $1,600 AWS bill. Feels good. Let's see. So to make that work, it needs Splunk will need the AWS account in order to retrieve the data, which makes sense if anybody uses Splunk for that it needs to be able to talk to those things. So create the account and then grab the necessary permissions and policies. All the docs are right there if you want to choose to go down that route. So that's basically it. Add the app, add the accounts, configure it, and you're good to go. You want to talk on it?
Yeah, so this one's a little weird. One thing that a guy with us who works with me realized was that by default, even if you configure the account, another thing you need to do is actually set up, and they give you instructions on it, so it's not like it's something we have to cover in this talk, but essentially you have to use SNS and SQS. SQS is a queuing service, and SQS will pull in data from CloudTrail and then push to SNS, and then SNS pushes to Splunk. So if you want to have pretty little graphs like that, that's what you have to do. And again, instructions are in the plugins. So, yeah. Should I just recap that?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, alert yourself when things change. Even if it's not malicious, you want to know as a security team. If it's a high-risk event, use SNS to blast everybody in real time. And, at least the 4 that I talked about should be in there. So Kiora, so I went on there and it was really interesting because what I found out was, let's talk about real quick your costs, like what AWS will cover if you get hacked and what they will cover. So apparently there's like a board at AWS when you get hacked and you've got the $100,000 bill that says, all right, what did you do? What did you do to follow our checklist to do some of the things that we've talked about here to secure your environment? If you didn't meet those things and it's clear you've just been irresponsible and not followed any of the practices that they put out, and they put out a lot of information, you're culpable. That's your cost. So it's just something to be aware of. I think we all know this here, but for those that don't, there's bots scouring Bitbucket and GitHub looking for these access keys. And then
There's a lot of them. Every day.
There's a lot of, and actually that's the last point right there. Yeah, there are a lot of them. So this happened when, it's crazy. If you go to this link, it just happens over and over again, and you just see time after time, like, yep, that happened to me. Yep, that happened to me. 30,000, 50,000, like, AWS might be making their money off of, like, people scouring and finding broken, or people who committed keys. So it's pretty insane, but it happens very frequently. I thought it was very interesting and something to add. So on restoration and recovery, good news and bad news. So we'll start with the bad news. There's no silver bullet. There's no great thing that I can give you that'll, back up everything seamlessly, and you've got a plan and you're good to go, and you give them some money and you're done. There's nothing that provides anything like that. The good news is we have a few basic steps that you can follow. For one, don't use AWS to back up your AWS stuff.
Why?
If credentials get stolen and you've backed everything up and they burn everything down, you're going to have a really, really bad time. Actually, Code Spaces went out of business because of this. And who's heard of Code Spaces? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's about right. So, really bad. They went out of business because of this. And so don't do that. The common things that people back up, though, are like, these are pretty easy to solve things, like EC2 images and volumes. Those are really easy to back up. There's APIs available, and there's these resources that are in these slides that show you, they give you service providers, some ways to do it yourself, and then I think a tool, Scalar or something like that. And that's
we actually have time for questions if there are
Yeah,
any.
we didn't think we would, but we started like 5 minutes early, so and went really fast. So,
Sure, in the black hat.
sure, yeah. So,
The question was, can we talk about managing SSH keys?
yeah. So with regards to managing SSH keys, I'd start with, do you have Splunk Enterprise? No. So in that case, what you could do is, it's very easy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Python and Boto 3, but if you are, you can write your own script that essentially daily pulls the list of keys. The more interesting thing is what those keys are associated with. And so you have the ability to go in and list all your volumes and all your EC2 images. I should say just go for the EC2 images, whatever. At that point, you can list all of the key pairs that are associated with your EC2 images. And you can then also sort of say like, actually, I'm going to defer on that last point. But yeah, that's what you can do. You can essentially go in and list with Python code, a very simple script, what's using those SSH keys, and then list all the SSH keys. But in terms of management, one thing I'll say though is you should, for one, the naming conventions should be, they should make sense, right? Like they shouldn't be, I've seen some weird ones where it's like, I don't know, I'll make something up, like Mickey Mouse or, whatever. It doesn't make any sense, but if you have keys that are sort of like, high prod, medium prod, low prod, same goes for staging, whatever. It's a little bit easier to manage those. Of course, then it goes to like, hey, do I want to rotate those keys when people leave? And you can absolutely do that, but depending on your environment, it might be more difficult than others. I think that's everything. Any follow-up on that? So one key to rule them all is a problem. One SSH key to rule them all. You sound like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're legitimately doing this and approaching this from the, like, I can log into IAM and do those things, is it Scout, right? Scout is the tool? Something like that. There's like a tool that, what's that? Yeah, Netflix has released some tools, and then one of the other consultant shops have released a tool that, like, you can log into IAM and get all this data for you.
Security Monkey.
Yeah, there's a few of them out there, and we'll when we do some notes, I'll add it to the slides of when you're not approaching it from like a pen test point of view of like, I found these keys, what can I do? But you want to say, show me what all these keys can do, and I can actually log into this stuff. There's a couple tools that will run and give you those reports and give you some information for that. And like Ken was saying, the Boto library is pretty simple. It shouldn't be much Python to like do that request and make a list daily or weekly or however often you choose to do that. Oh yeah, there's one over there. The question was, what's the advantage of using OS Query or third-party tools over dtrace? It's a great question. I know I don't know the ability of dtrace to actually send that information somewhere for you. OS Query has the ability to like post that somewhere and send all that data somewhere for you. So like to a syslog server or a Logstash or whatever you're using. But that's, I can noodle on it a little and get back to you, but that's probably the initial answer. Yeah, Rob.
So when a user exits a company either by firing or leaving, what is the best way to assess what they have access to and then remove those rights?
All right, the question was when someone leaves, how do you properly offboard them from AWS?
So if they leave, how to remove them? That's the question.
You find out what they had access to, what keys they had access to.
Oh, I'm glad you. I really am glad you. God, I'm glad you asked that. So I actually, we've got some open source stuff I want to release. I just didn't talk about it because, like, I hate when people talk about stuff that they're not releasing. That having said that, there's some. Essentially, again, with Bodo, I did this with Bodo and Python. Let's explain real quick what user policies, how many there are out there. So for one user in AWS, you've got you've got inline policies. Managed policies, those can be totally different. Managed policies are like what AWS comes pre-built with, and inline policies are like what you did, a custom policy you built, and then you can be attached to groups who have their own policies. And so in a recent review, we found that essentially one user might have like 3 groups with totally different permissions and inline and managed policies, and essentially you're like, well, I thought they only had access to this, but they've got access to everything. So that's the best way to audit, is just look at all of their policies. If you can automate it, which again is sort of like the code stuff I'm not talking about, yeah.
Really good question.
Yes, really good question, because
there's probably
you can have like crazy access.
Yeah, there's probably a business right there related to that. There's a free business idea. There was one more. Do you still have it? Yeah.
What would you say your first 3 IR tests are? You get one of these. They don't alert. All of a sudden things are going sky high. What's the first one?
Lockdown access for everyone. Like, deactivate every account that you can. Do that, and that's why you keep the root sacred, and that's why you keep it protected, so that you have the ability to go in there and do that for everybody. It might be a nuisance, but obviously somebody breaking in and doing bad stuff would be worse, right? So.
Yeah, and we had a couple slides around it, but took it out because we didn't have time to do it justice. But, doing IR in AWS is a different animal than like having an image at a laptop. So if you have an IR team or blue team or SOC or whatever, you need to practice that and figure out the policy, and probably need to have your forensic infrastructure in your AWS infrastructure so you can pull those images over and do all that other stuff and practice it. Be ready ahead of time, because if you're spinning up giant boxes with 2 terabytes to pull in giant images after the fact, it's going to suck. So
The one thing is, though, with the monitoring and logging in real time, is that you'll be able to get a feel based off just these things that we've talked about implementing of what's going on. And so if you need to rotate credentials, you'll know exactly which account, because those alerts will tell you, like, hey, this user is trying to, use Chris's tool to, access whatever, and they weren't allowed, or they were allowed, whatever. So, yeah. In that case, if you need to rotate credentials, you can figure that out pretty quickly. So, again, I think that's the whole point, is being able to have all that data and then be able in real time to respond to it. So, I guess your technique would differ.
All right. Thanks for coming and missing the Empire talk.
Thanks.